welcome to this episode of Boulders Brass, part of our 12-hour podcast-a-thon. I know, what a wild idea I had. And I'm so pleased to be joined with Beth and Letty from Gender and the Large and Shiny Instruments. So we're going to be hearing all about this new initiative of theirs and getting to know them, and hopefully giving you all some more people to go and follow and find out more brassy things about. So we normally start the sort of interview things off by meeting our guests. So I'm going to come to each of you in turn and let you tell us a little bit about yourselves and the things that you do, and then we'll find out about all the GALSI related things. So Beth, I'm going to come to you first. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Hello everyone. So I'm actually a bit of an imposter because I don't play a brass instrument. I'm a percussionist, but it's equally so lovely to be here. And obviously I sit very near the brass community. Lots of lovely brassers in my life, so yeah, great to be here. So I'm from London. I grew up in Charlton in southeast London. I haven't gone very far. I now live about sort of 30-minute walk, 15-minute drive from where I grew up, and I now live near Blackheath Standards, which is kind of near Greenwich. And yeah, I mean, I do lots of different kinds of work. In my playing, I mainly work in theatre. So I've just done a show at Shakespeare's Globe, and I've done a few different shows there as well. I've also worked at the National Theatre, which is where I met Letty. And then I do loads of random bits and bobs, really. So I do a bit of orchestral work. I play drum kit. I just basically try and do as much as I can. I try and keep everything super broad, constant plate spinning. That's what I most enjoy about playing percussion. I did an undergraduate at the University of Birmingham, music degree, so that was obviously quite broad, and I got to try lots of different things. And then I went on and did a master's at Guildhall, which was in percussion. Yeah, that's me.
Amazing. I liked when you said about plate spinning, because, you know, in the world of percussion, that genuinely could be one of your instrument sets one day is something involving plates. So I liked the idea that it was part of your setup, literally. Amazing. So Letty, I'm going to throw it over to you.
Hi, it's lovely to be here as well. So yeah, I'm Letty. I play the French horn. That's probably that's one of the instruments I play. I've recently, in the last year, got really into lots of other different types of horns. I did an artistic residency at Snape Maltings over the pandemic, which was lovely to do, really creative, very free, and got really interested in lots of ancient brass instruments, some of which were played by women, which is very exciting. But yeah, I likewise with Beth really enjoy a freelance career because it means you can do so many different things. And I think the biggest compliment I've ever got was from Jossie Lightfoot, who's a brilliant French horn player herself, and she said that she kind of had no idea of all the weird and wacky things that you could do being a French horn player until she's sort of seen me do a few of those. So yeah, I play in a band, perhaps Contraption, which is very good fun. We've just been doing some theatrical things over the last week as part of a film premiere, which is really fun. I do some theatre. I love working in theatre, it's really exciting. And then, yeah, I teach as well. And Beth and I are both trustees for the National Children's Orchestra, which has been something, it's been a very exciting, slightly sort of change direction for both of us over the last year. And yeah, we're just really excited to have set up this new company together that I think, yeah, will be something really, really exciting kind of going forwards in this next year. And yeah, like Beth, I did a music degree. I went to Oxford University, studied for a music degree, and then also did a master's at Guildhall. And I think both of us just love the flexibility that you can have in your career as a freelancer. You can do so many different things and follow so many different avenues. You don't need to be sort of stuck doing one thing or another. So yeah, I love that our lives are both so incredibly varied.
Yeah, I think it's one of my favourite things about running this podcast, full stop, has been hearing about all the different things that people do, and that there really is no one like true path of being a musician. And everyone does all these like wild things, like you said, that I didn't even know you could do with some of the instruments. It's excellent. So I'm really curious as to all things gender and the large shiny instruments. So I've put together a sort of set of questions. Feel free to, I don't know if you've divided these up or if you just want to each jump in and talk a little bit on all of the questions. I am going to leave that up to you. I will ask them and I will see what comes forth. And so my first question then is, how and why did this come to fruition?
That's one for Beth, I think. Beth.
I've been doing a bit of work in gender advocacy for a few years now. And I guess the why is that when I started getting more into the profession and further in my studies, I noticed that there were a lack of women around me. I didn't have any female teachers. Student departments, whilst actually weren't that bad, but were still more dominated by men than women. So there was a clear representation issue. And, I started going to more, concerts and stuff and, just started noticing it a little bit. And the other women around me, we were also speaking about it. And I also started working, as I said, more in theatre, and actually at somewhere like Shakespeare's Globe, they hire loads of female percussionists. So I just had a lot of questions in my brain, like, why am I seeing so many like wonderful freelance female percussionists in certain organisations and areas and not so much in others? It just raised a lot of questions. And then the other thing that I think ran in parallel for me was more sort of male-dominated cultures, and by that I mean maybe a lad culture, cultures and language that was exclusionary to women or made women feel, left out or that they weren't part of the club. So it's kind of an issue of representation and culture. It's just something I started noticing and sort of softly mentioning to people and seeing that other people would notice it too. So I hosted a roundtable discussion at Wigmore Hall. I want to say in oh my gosh, it was either 17 or 19. I know it was an odd number. I can't remember which year, but anyway, it hardly matters. And I'd done a bit of a data collection into the orchestral seats, as in how many were held by women versus men, and also teachers in conservatoires. And I can't remember the specific numbers, but it was around 90% to 10% generally. I've done some further looking into that as well, and sort of broken them down a bit. And the roundtable was really well attended by lots of people who run various musical organisations, as well as other percussionists, both male and female, and teachers. And it was just such a, interesting discussion. Absolutely terrifying day for me. I had never put myself out there like that before. But I remember saying at one point, and I don't know, I really truly believed it at the time. I don't know if I believe it now. I'd have to kind of think about that. But I remember saying, I don't know if this will change in my lifetime. I don't know if I will be able to ever have, say, a teaching position in a conservatoire because I'm a woman, but also actually because I'm a freelancer, because they generally go to people who aren't, as freelance as I am. And I just remember seeing shock on all the managers' faces and thinking, how have they not seen this? To me, it's so obvious. Whenever I go to a concert, I see it hits me around the head, but no one else seems to be seeing this as much. So from that, I kind of was making a lot of connections, was being asked to do various bits of speaking. I did some work with some students. I've done various bits and bobs since then, but really wanted to kind of bring it together and consolidate it in one thing that had a name and had a presence, like that people could find. I was picking up lots of women on my way as well, who were also really, really interested in wanting to be involved. I just started thinking, I don't need to be doing this on my own, I want to draw in some other people. And I mean, the first person that I was really keen to draw in was Letty, who came to, I did some networking events with SWOPRA, which is supporting women and parents in opera. I did one event for women and those who identify as women and non-binary people in brass, a separate one for percussionists and a separate one for stage managers. And Letty came to the brass one. I just thought the way you spoke was so articulate and positive and productive, and it just made me really want to sort of bring you in on it. And I was really lucky that Letty said yes. And maybe Letty, you should pick it up from what happened after that point.
Oh, thanks, Beth. I think my pathway into all of this was a little bit different perhaps from Beth's, but the same kind of common ground of just working and thinking that there weren't many women around me. Same kind of thing working in theatre and noticing that the numbers were much less different than in symphony orchestras or chamber orchestras or anything to do with kind of conservatoire setups. And yeah, just wanting to address it in some kind of positive way that spark dialogue, spark conversation, and might ultimately spark change. And I think our company is first and foremost about sparking positive dialogue and positive conversation, and just kind of opening dialogue to address all of these different issues, because there's not one issue behind why there are not more women working in brass and percussion. There's lots of things that feed into it, and it's kind of just putting at those little threads, seeing what kind of nuanced conversations can come from those, and thinking about what we can all do together to try and shape the future so that it looks a little bit more positive than it does at the moment. And I think, yeah, Beth and I put this company together. We deliberately wanted it to have a really fun name. And I think gender and the large and shiny instruments completely encapsulates that. They are large, they're very shiny. We just wanted it to be really fun from the word go, examining very serious subjects, but in a very positive framework. We had our launch back in the autumn at the Royal Overseas League, which was fantastic. And through the company, Beth and I sort of felt the same way, but wanted to open up our company to other people, other women who might be great to work with. So we actually have a number of ambassadors who are female musicians at the top of their game. They're all incredible musicians working across a variety of very different genres. And they all came to our launch, played, which was a really important part of it, because I think what we're trying to do with the company is just lead from music. Music is the thing that is the most important in all of this. Everyone wants high quality music making. That's first and foremost. And then ideally to look at who's making that music. So we had a launch at the Royal Overseas League. We heard everybody play, and we heard everyone speak a little bit about their backgrounds, where they'd kind of come from, how they got to that point, and where they might go next. And I think something that's really important to both Beth and I through this company is championing women, brilliant women, and people who perceive themselves as within that kind of framework, non-binary communities. It's looking at who's out there already, because there's not a fundamental kind of lack of female brass and percussionists. It's just that we're maybe not seeing them represented across all kind of all areas. And I think it was a really impressive event, actually. I think even more so than Beth and I had ever dreamt it could be our launch, because just to hear everyone play was number one, kind of just hearing incredible music making at such a high level. Also hearing instruments that are not conventionally played as solo instruments. I think that was really exciting in a very intimate space. We really got to listen to that music making. And then just to hear what everyone's stories were was really great to kind of meet people and see where they'd come from. So that's basically where we got to.
It's so interesting. I was thinking about this morning, preparing for this chat, and I was sort of thinking, well, at my college, I studied at Trinity Laban. I thought, oh, actually, we had a few women in the department, and maybe the balance wasn't that off. And then I totaled it up, and it was one woman to every 5 men. And I thought, actually, that's a very odd statistic, isn't it? 1/6 of our department, including the staff, were women, and I hadn't really thought about it very much before. So it's really interesting that you've noticed this too.
That's not as bad as what we're seeing in professional orchestras, though, which is interesting. Where they're going. That's what surprised me. Where they're going. Same here. Many conservatoires I've looked at, yes, there are less women in the departments that we're speaking about. Not always. I actually worked with a department that was majority female percussion students, and they were still also having quite a rough time because of a few bad egg male students.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think I often see a department where the ratios are as bad as we see in the industry. So I do wonder what happens.
It's interesting. My partner works in STEM. He's a scientist. And we were talking about this yesterday, and he said, it's interesting, you're doing this interview about, women in brass and percussion and where they go as we go farther up the chain. And he said, actually, similar research has been done in science. And I was so curious then. I thought, I wonder how the parallels compare, because they say the same. Student base is often, not wildly one way or the other. If you go further up the chain to, researchers and higher ups in whatever companies and things, you then see almost exclusively men. And it was curious that there were so many similarities there. And I wonder if in time you might find out if there is a reason as to why.
Yeah, I think it's also very interesting because Beth and I both work in education. We teach and we work with young people who are much younger than a conservatoire level. And certainly I'm head of brass at Highgate School. I work at Trinity Junior Department, as does Beth. We work in a number of different school environments, and we also work for the National Children's Orchestra and other young people's orchestras and organisations. And you just don't see this disparity. I've got plenty of little girls who are coming up learning brass. I know Beth has as well. It's not there that needs addressing. I don't think we've got these numbers that are looking pretty good going all the way through. And I think it's also not even a perception that I think a lot of younger players don't perceive that there should be a gender divide between instruments. They're happy to learn whatever. We've got, certainly in NCO, there's a really good representation of little girls playing brass, heavy brass, low brass instruments, which is awesome, which I love. So that's okay. It's looking at this kind of tail off. And I think you've hit the nail on the head that at conservatoire level, it's maybe not 50-50, but it's not looking as bad. It's then what happens and further up the scale. And I think perhaps the worst crunch point is when women come to have a family, or think about perhaps having children, or getting a little bit kind of like that next stage. I think then, unfortunately, it looks from just our figures, people we've talked to, looking at the profession, that stage then that's the real problem stage, and it's looking at what we can possibly do to help with that stage, because something is obviously not quite working.
Yeah, it does seem just to get less and less and less through adulthood. And when I think, how many sort of older men can I think of who play, to be honest, all the instruments, but our instruments in particular, I can think of quite a few. How many older women can I think of? Worryingly few, and that makes me feel really worried about my future, my career progression.
And do you think that there's a pattern that you've noticed as to where people are dropping off and perhaps why? And do you think any of it, especially when we're talking about the orchestral world, do you think any of it comes from open auditions? Do you think there can be any benefit for women in screened auditions?
We talked a little bit with one of our ambassadors, Imogen Whitehead, about this, and she was saying that she's done a number of screen auditions and really likes them, and obviously with a screen audition you do get that kind of parity as an opening thing, but then I don't know, you have your screen audition for your first round, and then unfortunately often the second round is not screened, and for me then that sort of takes away a lot of the benefits that the first round of screenings might have offered. I think certainly it's, if you just kind of look through where the drop-off point comes, I think there's one drop-off point perhaps post-conservatoire, and then there's, as we've said, a number of drop-off points kind of going a little bit further, and perhaps that stage of family and sort of future career is another point where women unfortunately seem to be just kind of leaving the profession.
Yeah, speaking from my perspective, I could have gone down an orchestral route, like strictly orchestral, if I wanted to. And I don't think this is actually just women, but when I was graduating, I was thinking about what I wanted to do. And it's just really hard to get into an orchestra, isn't it? Like, there's not many positions. You have to do all these grueling auditions, some of which are highly unlikely to be, the loveliest of experiences. And then even if you make it through there, could be years on trial with people watching what you're doing, and kind of always having to slightly be a bit on edge before you might highly, maybe will not be offered a seat. So when I thought about that as an ordeal, and then kind of adding in gender, when there are places where, well, I've been advised not to audition places because kind of save your time type thing, depends on who the principal is. And then, it's so much more likely that you're going to be sitting with people who, treat you a bit differently, or where you might have to be the butt of the joke, like, that sort of culture I spoke about a bit earlier. And it just didn't sound worth it to me. Like all of that work to sit with people who maybe I don't feel I can completely be myself around. And then at the same time, I was receiving this theatre work in places where I felt really fully embraced. And that's why I didn't go for it. And it's just really hard. I think you have to really want it and feel safe in that environment in order to push. It's a tough thing to do.
Yeah, and I wonder if, we've all probably had these gigs where we've turned up and we've, as you say, not felt like we've been entirely part of the team. Is this sort of, I guess, boys' club culture still something that you feel like you've each experienced recently?
I don't know that it's necessarily, I mean, just from my perspective, I don't know that it's the boys' culture that is the most off-putting thing. For the French horn world, perhaps my experiences within it, that's not been the overwhelming factor. For me, it's that there is not enough representation of women doing my job. And like Beth says, if I look at people who are 10 years ahead of me, 20 years ahead of me, 30 years ahead of me, I can see very few role models for myself. And then looking for my students kind of coming up, I can't see many role models for them to have a look at either. So for me, it's much more about this kind of representation issue. Having said that, there is definitely a lads culture that very much exists in the brass world. And I would hope that is in some way getting a little bit better. I don't know whether it is or not. I know that it definitely still exists, but my own experiences haven't been to do with that. Perhaps it's been the work that I've chosen to do. Like Beth, if you work in a theatrical environment or you choose to go down a slightly different path, perhaps you encounter that slightly less. But still, to me, there needs to be a bit more. There need to be more people who I can aspire in my own career to being like in 10, 20, 30 years. And I don't see that myself at present.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
For me, yeah, I have found the lad culture to be a barrier, and it has made me not want to, join in with certain things. And yeah, a lot of people kind of say, oh, that will die out, it's a generational thing, it will go. In total honesty, when I was studying, and I wasn't studying that long ago, it was very much within the student culture as well as some of the teachers as well. So from what I saw and what I've seen in a couple of other places and departments, some young people do still join in with that culture. And I think it is kind of tied up with, how competitive work is. They want to get by. They feel it's the way to get the work from maybe this professional that they've seen do similar cultures. They just want to get by. And obviously that means it has a really negative impact on some of us. I do hope it's getting better. And I mean, I'm really lucky that a lot of people I've been working with are really lovely, but I do choose to surround myself with them.
I think it's also, I mean, certainly what we're trying to do as a company is very much not just work with women or kind of narrow ourselves down to one area. I think in order for the change to happen, it needs to be men supporting women and very much kind of being vocal and calling out behaviour that is not acceptable. And I think certainly having chatted to both women and men in the brass playing sort of community, I think a lot of men don't really like the lad culture, and I think they feel very uncomfortable. And I think certainly that, especially when it's perhaps coming into play at conservatoire level, boys don't want to have to go and drink. And I think there can be sometimes much more pressure on male students and young men coming through to fill that mold. And I think that's very sad as well. I think that's something that negatively impacts everybody. I mean, the whole lad culture is not a good idea all round, but I think it's certainly not just a female problem. And I think it's something that is an industry-wide problem that does need everybody to have conversations to be able to kind of stop in some way. And I think what's been very positive is certainly through the work that Beth and I have already done, a number of men are kind of obviously coming forwards to support us vocally and to make those changes happen. I think it's really important that whatever we're saying to a very wide audience. We're bringing in everybody, because this is not, and I want this to be really clear, this is not a problem with men. This is something that is a problem for everybody within that culture, and needs addressing on a much wider platform overall.
Yeah, it's just literally about people being able to feel that they can be themselves at work and be comfortable in their own skins. That's literally all it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really interesting way to frame it, actually, is that, you know, the boys in that sort of lad culture don't necessarily want to be that way. They're, I suppose, filling a void for the people above them as well, you know. And I wonder if a lot of it is from the role models that they're getting already. You know, if like you said at the beginning, Beth, if we're just waiting for this generation of role models to move on so that things can improve, and that sort of timeline sounds frightening, doesn't it? Oh, it just made me like nearly fall out of my chair. So then I'm I'm really curious then as to, you know, what can we do to change it? What can we all do? Not just, you know, the people within Gender and the Large Shiny Instruments, everyone that's listening to this, what can we do to help?
I think empathy, just generally being empathetic to other people and accepting of others, like even if they're different to you. You know, being aware when you might be slightly applying pressure or maybe making an assumption, you know, a bit of self-reflection.
Mm-hmm. I think it's just, it's everyone starting to have more conversations and just kind of unpacking why those stereotypes perhaps exist. And I think the timing of Beth and I launching this company is kind of no accident. We've come out of this global pandemic, the world has changed. And I think now is the time to try and really kind of make impactful change within our industry, which I think starts with identifying areas that could improve and then just having a lot of conversations to see what can happen about those. There is no quick fix for anything within this, but I think certainly just examining why there are those kind of drop-off points post-conservatoire level. Why are there women dropping out of the profession then? Who knows? Why then are there women not continuing through the profession until they reach, you know, a much older age? Why isn't that happening as well? And kind of just looking at those drop-off points and seeing what could be done better. And certainly the idea of things like mentoring is something that Beth and I would love to bring into conservatoires. We can't necessarily change the teaching staff, nor would we necessarily want to, but just having more people who are a broader representation of artists and musicians working in the community, having more people as role models to kind of look up to, so that students coming through can see lots of very different options of what they might like to do with their careers, and just sort of giving a much wider breadth and much wider scope to things, I think can only be a good thing. I think that very narrow model where you're just going through music college to aim for a principal job of one single orchestra, that's not necessarily what everybody will want to do at all going through that music college. And I think if there's a much wider representation of different people doing very different careers in very different areas, it at least gives a lot more options for students going through. And just having more options, I think, might mean that there's fewer dropouts post-college going into the profession in slightly different ways. And yeah, I think in, you know, ultimately just having more conversations about things and having more mentoring and role models available to younger students, I think in the short term that might be one potential way of kind of addressing things.
That's really interesting because with at running the risk of sounding like I'm criticizing my department head at college, which I'm absolutely not. I think he did a fantastic job. It was quite, if I think back to, we had weekly department classes. I can remember maybe getting one class with someone who looked like me or had a job that like appealed to me. And I understand that for a lot of it, they're filling those spaces with their colleagues and their friends and people that they know to come and present to us. But those people have been in the industry for 20 years, 30 years already. I'd love to have met with people who were recently in the industry or people that were doing something a bit more unusual. Just like you said, it would have been so much more helpful, because I speak about this a lot on my podcast, and this is essentially what I've just done now. I've just railroaded the whole thing. But it took me until this year to realize that my job was an okay way to have a job, and it didn't make me any less of a musician to do what I do. But why did it take me 8 years since I graduated to feel that way? Surely we should all be graduating in, if we formed a career that we're happy with, that's sustainable, that should be good enough. But I was like, oh, I'm not doing auditions anymore. Womp womp, I must suck now. And it can't be that way. But it felt like that was the only way it could be. And yeah, so interesting. God, it's like sparking millions of ideas in my own head now as to, things that I wish had been a little bit different.
Classical music has a big issue with prestige, Anything with the word royal or sometimes London often comes with a lot of weight. And yeah, I feel quite lucky that I don't think I've ever been too enamoured by prestige. For me, a good day at work is working with people that, I really get on with, creating really good music that I enjoy. It's not necessarily about the, organisation. And yeah, I think showing a more varied view of what a career can be is a really good thing. And for me, like, I've decided that I don't want to have a full-time position in an orchestra. I love playing with orchestras, but I don't want to. There's loads of reasons why I don't want to. And I really enjoy the career I have. And yet when I say that to people, sometimes I do see in their face maybe an assumption that I couldn't get into an orchestra. And that's not a correct assumption. I could have gotten into an orchestra. It is a genuine choice for me not to go for one of those positions. I don't know if people always believe that, actually. I think that as a job, it's still kind of held on a pedestal. And I don't really know why. I don't know why.
I think as well, I think there are so many different career paths within music that are possible to follow and have a very fulfilling and really amazing career. And I think certainly for Beth and I with our company, it's looking at like really high class music making that is just happening with some incredible musicians who don't work at all in the same areas and are just kind of spread across all these very different genres, but are still making music at a very high level. And I think to me, it's very important that my music making is at a very high level, and it's something that I feel is very, very worthwhile, and I feel is very much on a par with anything that anyone would be doing at a high level in music. I don't think it matters whether it's orchestral or chamber or contemporary music. I think it can all be delivered at a very high level, and I don't believe that any one thing is worth more than anything else. I think certainly whatever I've tried to do in my career has been to try and put something a little bit new out that's creative and fun and offer something that is a niche that hasn't been filled already. So it's looking at where the gaps are in music. I find that very exciting personally, identifying where a new niche might be and then looking at ways of filling that. And also trying to change the perception of classical music. I mean, for a lot of my career, have tried to demystify classical music. I've tried to really allow other people to get involved with it in some way and take it off that kind of slightly unapproachable, distant pedestal that it can sometimes stand on. And I think perhaps that's one perception of music that that exists, and maybe that's part of the problem, that we do sort of view orchestral classical music as being in some way the top, whereas it's just another form of music. It's a great form of music, but it's just one of a huge range of different genres.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, amazing. I feel like I'm learning so much. I feel like I'm like taking a class. It's amazing. And so with putting the company together so far then, is there sort of a biggest learning curve that you've had along the way, or is there, best piece of advice that you would give to your former pre-GALSI selves?
Ooh, Beth.
That is a really tricky one. I think in terms of advice, it's just be yourself, uncompromisingly be yourself, feel happy, go with people that you love, and keep hold of friends. That's it, really. I know that's not super connected to music.
I've got one more, which is very relevant to Beth, and I think she Beth's being very modest here. She did an amazing article which was all about peer heroes with one of our ambassadors for GALSI, whose percussionist called Rosie. And it was one of the most incredible articles I've ever written. And it was basically to find somebody you work with and become their peer hero, and they become yours, and you support each other. You offer very honest advice to each other. You promote them in their careers, and you really try to just to kind of help them as much as possible, but be a sounding board for each other. And I think certainly from our launch, we have a number of people, and I would like to feel that we are all peer heroes to one another. I think it's that thing of, you want someone in a room of people to suggest your name, and especially women supporting other women, I think is a really important thing. But just knowing that in your career, you've got people who they have your back and you have theirs. I think that was definitely something that came out of our launch for me, that I think is an incredibly positive step that we all take.
That's actually reminded me of a story and a learning curve. When I very first started doing this stuff, and I did that roundtable discussion, it was really exciting. There were some really exciting names in the room. And, you start thinking, oh my gosh, what can this be? Is it going to be like this thing? Is it going to go with this? Is this organisation going to want to collaborate? Blah, blah, blah. And, sure, that sometimes does happen. But really, the best thing that came out of that round table was a percussionist came. I hadn't met her before. It was the first time I met her. And she just listened. And I think she hadn't been in a room where people had spoken about what it's like to be a female percussionist before. I saw her again, a couple of years later, a good couple of years later, and I hadn't spoken to her since, hadn't seen her since, and we were booked to do a gig which had 11 percussionists on it, so it was a lot of percussionists, and I think there was 4 women, which actually, could be worse, could be better, but yeah, anyway, it's not terrible, is it? But she literally ran up to me and was like, I am so happy you're here. And that just took me aback so much. And I really thought about it. And I think she just knew that there was someone else there who was on her side, someone else there who wasn't going to judge her. I try to come across as authentically who I am, which I really don't judge. If someone makes a mistake, I don't think, oh, you're a terrible percussionist. That means you're bad forever, And, I say these things openly, and I probably did say stuff like that on the round table back then as well. But she just looked so relieved. And that made me feel quite emotional, actually. And the best thing I've been doing with this work has been those individual conversations with colleagues. It just has. And people have reached out to me and kind of just being like, you know what? We can just actually be friendly, and we can just support each other, and it's those one-to-one things rather than the big shiny I'm talking on that platform, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. It's those one-to-one interactions which actually I feel have made the biggest difference so far.
And very much at our launch back in the autumn, that was one thing that was incredibly moving and really powerful. We finished the launch, and then it was all these very individual conversations over a glass of wine of people just on the same kind of page, starting to have conversations together and having those one-on-one chats. And I think that was a really lovely moment, that everyone felt that they could just share something. It was a very safe space. It was a very open room, and everyone kind of then was really starting to open those conversations, which was a lovely thing to be part of.
That's really interesting. I'm wondering, it's sort of sparked another sort of pathway in my brain, is that there's nowadays a lot of talk about sort of well-being and looking after musicians in general. I sort of wonder if from that we'll see more empathetic, more well-rounded, more open-minded musicians, which I wonder if that leads to some of these conversations and the improvements that we're wanting to see. I'm hoping that perhaps they would go hand in hand to sort of make the changes and the improvements that we're hoping for.
I think they certainly do. I also think this is potentially one of the positives to come out of the pandemic. I think in general there is more of an emphasis on well-being, and also emphasis on freelancers and how we treat freelancers, how we work with freelancers. I think managers are now way more aware of what it's like to be a freelancer and how to work with them. And I do think things such as well-being, things such as awareness helps all forms of diversity. Yeah, and I mean, just like sort of anecdotally, you do come across slightly more like yoga participants, marathon runners, you know, a slightly more healthy attitude to life. And just to be honest, happiness and feeling chilled within yourself, I do think combats like lad culture, really, because to me, when I see it, it's all about fear and competition and judgment and fear of judgment. It's all of that. It's insecurity just everywhere, isn't it? But well-being does help you feel more at one in yourself, for sure.
Yeah, and also just looking at what everyone would like the future of music to be, and it would astonish me if genuinely anyone wanted the future of music to be one gender, or based around a lad drinking culture. I would be absolutely astonished if anyone wanted that to be the case. So I think it's kind of, yeah, just looking at what we can do to all feel well and happy at work and supported, and to be making, I mean, you know, if you are in a position where you're feeling well in yourself and supported, and you're having empathetic chats with your colleagues, surely that will filter into the creative work that you're doing, and it will help that really come together. I mean, certainly playing the French horn, it's an instrument where you need supportive colleagues around you. You need to feel like you're in a section. You need that teamwork in order to create your best possible artistic project, a musical project. I think all of this kind of the well-being side, it can only filter into a better artistic project at the end of the day.
Yeah, more healthy, more well-rounded, well-balanced musicians. We've got to be better musicians, surely. Gone are the sort of drug and booze fueled like musicians of yesteryear. And
you're just going to live longer, you know. Yeah,
yeah, the new industry will be better because the people coming through will just live for longer and take it up for longer. Yeah. I like that. So I'm asking the following question to sort of every panel that's taking part in the podcast-a-thon, because everyone comes up with these brilliant ideas for this one. And this is then for each of you. If money were no object, no obstacle at all, is there a dream project, and it can be similar or different to GALSI, that you would love to be involved in or to run? Complete dream project.
Take it away, Letty.
Well, we do have a number of kind of dream projects, but one project that I think would be fantastic, which is related to GALSI, is setting up a kind of brass band model that was a little bit different to your traditional brass band, in that it would be inclusive for everybody, and try and kind of work with grassroots groups. I think the beautiful thing about brass and percussion instruments is that they are pretty cheap. They're pretty available, and they're not that difficult to start learning. And I think that brass band model conventionally is just wonderful in that it's cross generations of people playing together from 7 or 8 years all the way to 70, 80 years. It brings a whole community together and can get really serious. If you've ever been to brass banding things in the north of England, it's a serious endeavour. but it's that community spirit of everyone together being part of a genuine community cause that comes with an awful lot of quite serious music making. And certainly if you look at high quality brass players who really made it to the top of their career across the spectrum, a lot of them come from brass bands backgrounds. So it's that thing of, you start out, you work with your community, you're probably, in a brass band with your parents, with your family, with cousins. Obviously it involves percussion as well, and you just go through that system. And for some people, that's what you want to do. It forms musicians of the future. So I think for both of us, we would love to start out a really kind of grand broad scale brass band competition, not competition, start out some brass band community work, and then of course if money was no object, it would be great to take that across the globe and try and expand our brass band empire to as many countries as we'd like to take part in it. But certainly starting with something small and grassroots would be brilliant.
I love this. My listeners know I grew up in banding. I secretly still love brass bands. It's not very secret anymore. I really like them. So I absolutely love this. And it's exactly what you said. Like, I was in the same band as my dad and my brother growing up, and it was all very so cute. Lovely. It was so fun. And yeah, we're doing a whole panel on brass bands. So maybe I'll throw that idea at them and see what they think too.
Yeah.
Definitely. And I think, that kind of thing of a brass band, you look at New Orleans brass bands, you look at brass bands that are happening all over the globe, they are playing some really exciting music that is very, very different to your kind of conventional, like floral dance type stuff. It can be completely something other. So I think it could be quite an exciting vehicle.
I love that. Cool. Beth, have you got anything to add to the sort of dream project?
Yeah. I mean, I was kind of reflecting on what I really, really care about. Obviously, the brass band project as well, I think is brilliant, especially because it's such a huge part of community music making. I mean, we have this question in classical music all the time, like, how do we reach communities? How do we reach communities that aren't in the South? How do we reach, and like, brass bands, do you know what I mean? Like, it's already there, we're doing it already. Like, it's such genuine community-based music. So I think we need to talk about them more, and it's great that you are. But yeah, the other sort of group I really care about is teenagers and students. I love working with teenagers and students. I get on with them really well. I don't know why. So much so that actually I was teaching some teenagers recently, and two of my students were just like swearing away in front of me. Like, they were making mistakes and being like, oh, and then like swearing. And I was like, okay, maybe I need to like add some boundaries here, like, where's this respect, what's going on? But anyway, I seem to get on with them really well. And I think it's such a tough time. I think being a teenager and a student is already so tough. The social risk. I remember how embarrassing saying just like the smallest thing that was a little bit weird would be. I just really empathise with people of that age. It is such a tough time. And then throw into the mix, learning an instrument, trying to take it to essentially a competitive level, and then potentially being a gender which is, in the minority for your instrument. I think it's a lot. I think it's a huge amount to be contending with. So yeah, something with that age group would be my dream. And I'm currently working towards a qualification, a practitioner level qualification in coaching. So coaching and mentoring is something I really, really care about and something I'm trying to develop a lot. So I'd love to kind of include that in the work we're doing much, much more, and especially with that age group and with people who otherwise might not be able to afford something like coaching. I'd love to do something that's a bit more equal playing field for people.
That's amazing too. What a lovely idea. You're absolutely right. Yeah, teenagers are a difficult age. And I also find it very easy to relate to them. And they also are very relaxed and swear in front of me. Maybe there's something going on. I think maybe though, a lot of the time I'm just like, well, this is a sort of environment where we make a lot of mistakes and we want to encourage them to be as much their authentic self, like we said. Totally. But sometimes I just turn a little blind eye.
Yeah. We usually when a mistake happens, it's like
Exactly. Oh, it's completely fine. So folks, I don't want to keep you for too long, so we're gonna wrap up pretty soon. Now, if people are, sparked by this and they want to find out more about all things GALSI and how they can support all the things that you're doing, where can they go to find things out and what can they do?
You can go to our website, which is www. Is it large and shiny?
Yeah.
largeandshiny.com. I've got the worst memory. I'm so sorry. It's totally embarrassing. So we have a website. It's really great. You should go look at that. We also have social medias, which annoyingly aren't the same handle. And Letty, do you know what they are?
Yeah, we've got large and shiny for Instagram, which that's the only negative of setting up a company. It takes an awful lot of time. So we will be getting back on the socials, and we're also on Twitter,
which I think is at GALSI or GALSI Music.
Exactly.
You'll find it. You'll be fine.
That's perfect. We will make sure to include links and tags and all sorts everywhere. But thank you both so much for coming and talking so candidly and letting us know all the things that you're up to.
Thank you. Such a pleasure. Thank you.